So today we are joined by two guest speakers who will share their knowledge and expertise in relation to hate speech and hate in online humor. And we are ready to move to our next speaker, who is my colleague, Dr. Maja Brand Andreasen, who works as a postdoctoral researcher at the CU Anti-Bullying Center. Maja has a PhD in gender studies and is a member of the Observatory on Cyberbullying, Cyber Hate, and Online Harassment. And today she will share examples of internet memes from a study she conducted on the Me Too movement. And she will discuss how online humor can reproduce misogyny, racism, and homophobia. So I'm looking forward to your presentation, Maja, and feel free to start when you're ready.
Yes, thank you very much, Angela. Right, so just quickly before I get started today, I just want to advise that I will be talking about issues around sexual violence, and I will show memes that make fun of experiences of sexual violence. So I just wanted to flag that before I get started. Right. So today I want to consider the production of hate in online humor. Specifically, I want to talk about the way hate exists in online communication. So that means considering the notion of hateful language. This thought process came from research I've conducted into the portrayal of sexual violence in internet humor about #MeToo. Here I was particularly interested in the way humor functioned to make fun of victim survivors of sexual violence, and how such a humorous discourse worked as a way to minimize and trivialize experiences of sexual violence. A second aspect of this research was the way gender, sexuality, and race was portrayed in the specific examples of internet humor. And this is where hate comes into the picture. Because I found that many other researchers before me and since then have found, which was an abundance of examples of misogyny, of homophobia, and of racism. And this is what I want to talk to you about today. So when I talk about hate online, it's about the way marginalized groups are ridiculed, the way they're reduced to stereotypes, and it's the way that they're pushed to the margins. And this all happens within what I refer to as a humorous discourse. So a humorous discourse which has hateful and harmful language at its core. So let's think a bit more about what harmful and hurtful language means. Judith Butler talks about the notion of what she calls injurious language. She notes that language and name calling is how we make sense of the world and the people around us. So by giving something a name means that we make that thing recognizable. We make sense of it. But that name calling can both be hurtful and harmful. And this is what she refers to as injurious language. So in other words, she establishes the notion that language has the ability to injure us, to hurt and harm us. And in that sense, some types of language or communication can function as violence. When considering this notion that language has the ability to hurt us, it becomes quite interesting to look at humor. This is because humor is often dismissed as harmless, as something that should not be taken seriously. And this is what I refer to as the just a joke discourse. So the idea that anything goes if it was intended as a joke, something that's framed as a bit of fun, as banter, or as locker room talk, if you will. This in turn means that harm caused by humorous statements or offense taken by a humorous statement tends to be dismissed. And the problem then ends up lying with the person being harmed rather than the person who made the potentially harmful statement. So what I'm interested in my research is to take humor seriously and argue against the notion that humor is always harmless. So what happens when we take humor seriously and look at what goes on within a humorous discourse? What I find particularly interesting is the idea that humor tells us something about the social order. So it can both impose and disrupt the social order. This is what Michael Billig refers to as the paradoxes of humor. Billig notes that humor is both universal and particular. It is to be found in all societies, but not all humans find the same things funny. So this, in other words, means that humans do not share the same sense of humor, and the idea that something is objectively funny does not actually really exist. The second paradox is that humor is both social and antisocial. It can bring people together in a bond of enjoyment, and by mockery, it can exclude people. So I take this to mean that it creates an us versus them. If we are part of the we, that is a great social experience. But if we're part of the them, it excludes us from that we, being any given social group. And it situates us as quote unquote others, as someone who exists outside of a given social group. Michael Billig makes an interesting distinction between two sorts of humor. So first he talks about disciplinary humor, which is a type of humor that mocks those who break the social rules and thus kind of upholds those rules. So it functions as a disciplining of the people. And then on the other hand, there's rebellious humor, which mocks the social rules and thereby challenges or rebels against those rules. And finally, he has this third idea of a rebellious humor with a disciplinary function. So that means a joke, for example, that might appear to mock those in power, and in that sense appearing to be rebellious, while it simultaneously disciplines marginalized people and then therefore upholds the norm. So I'm going to try not to go into too much more detail in terms of theory, as I realize we have quite an audience today from quite diverse backgrounds, but I want to just share a few more concepts with you before I move on to discussing memes. So first, there's the notion of harmlessness. So the idea that because an utterance is expressed under the guise of humor, it shouldn't be taken seriously. And if an utterance is not to be taken seriously, it cannot logically offend. The researchers Bill Miller and Schneider do some research on sexist humor and talk about how this has serious implications, both on an individual and institutional level. So an us versus them duality between men and women, where women end up being the inferior part. And women can be pinned against other women when jokes reinforce the notion of, for example, ideal female beauty. On an institutional level, jokes might support the idea that women should stay in the public sphere. Then there's the notion of intentionality. So the idea that the intent of the joke teller is ultimately determining for whether or not a joke can cause offense. Elise Kramer notes that in Western societies, we put emphasis on the intent of the joke teller, so making the actual content of the joke, what is actually semantically being said in any given sentence, less important than what the joke teller means, what their intention is. And this discourse of intentionality maintains that as long as no joke teller is, as long as the joke teller is trying to be funny, no harm is done, and no audience can legitimately claim offense. What is particularly significant when considering humor that is produced online is that this humorous discourse tends to exist in a space where intent is impossible to establish. And this is because internet memes have no author and no clear recipe for interpretation. They are open for interpretation, and even more importantly, they're mostly uploaded by users who have anonymous accounts. So this anonymity makes the notion of intent even more blurry, because how can we know what the intent is of the person who uploads a given meme when we cannot even know who the person is? However, I would like to question this idea of intent even further, because is claiming that something was intended as a joke the same as the utterance being perceived as a joke? I would argue that the speaker of the joke and the receiver of the joke might have completely different perceptions of the joke. And much of this will have to do with power, with identity, with who gets to speak and who tends to be silenced. So the memes I want to share with you today come from a study where I collected data from 3 social media sites in 2017. The social media sites 9gag, Reddit, and Imager. And I used the 4 search terms, #MeToo, Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, and Louis C.K. I'm not going to go into much detail, or any more detail actually, about the methodology. I'm happy to answer questions about it in the Q&A. The platforms here were chosen because they in some way are framed as humorous discursive spaces. So this means, for example, that 9gag is described as, quote, your best source for fun, unquote, and words such as happy and laugh are repeated throughout the platform. One of the rules from one of the specific sites I looked at on Reddit explicitly states that, quote, all posts must make an attempt at humor, unquote. And Imager talks about making people smile and brightening their day. So humorous content is encouraged on these websites, and users can expect humorous content. And that's what I mean by humorous discursive spaces. So pausing for a moment on the internet meme, just so we all know what we're talking about. Here I've included an example. An example of a meme that seemed appropriate for what I'm talking about today. So basically a meme that makes fun of the meme researcher, such as myself. Here we have an example of what we refer to as an image macro. So one specific image that has become a recognizable meme, where the specific image is repurposed and reused again and again with a new image text. It has the classic meme format with that text at the top of the image, which sets up the joke, to which the bottom text functions as the punchline. In this case, the meme has been used so much and for so many years that it has a name. This particular meme is known as condescending Wonka. It features an image of the actor Gene Wilder from the 1971 film Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, with Wilder as the title character. As the name suggests, the caption of this meme tends to be patronizing and sarcastic. So obviously the creator and the reader of such a meme must know all these subcultural clues in order to fully grasp the meaning of the meme. On memes sharing sites, we often see a kind of policing of the true meaning of a meme, where users will be scolded and ridiculed for uploading a meme that other users deem to be used incorrectly. Meme production and meme circulation therefore functions as a quite clear example of signaling of as a clear example of signaling belonging via humor. So you either get the meme or you don't. The same way that one might not get a joke or not even find a joke funny, and that comes with the risk of being excluded from this idea of the collective we. So I want to just touch upon a few characteristics of internet memes. So first of all, they are intertextual. They refer to each other in a complex and sometimes creative way. Second, they are characterized by copying, imitation, and remixing, thus making them pillars of participatory digital culture. Memes are in a constant state of flux. A meme is never one fixed thing and does not belong to any individual. However, while memes might diffuse from person to person, they shape and reflect social mindsets. Though memes might be perceived as lighthearted, humorous, and non-serious content, taking memes seriously has the potential to reveal dominant norms. Furthermore, memes lend themselves as particularly useful for the spread of gendered, racial, and sexual stereotype. As the researcher Ryan Milner argues, they are, quote, fixed heuristic shortcuts for assessing novel information, unquote, which means that by employing simple stereotypical attributes to a meme, and in his example, he uses the example of linking African Americans to monkeys, Jewish people to greed, and Middle Eastern people to backward savagery. So these stereotypical attributes in a meme communicate stereotypes that are so persistent that they're easily decodable even for people who do not sympathize with these stereotypes. Now I will turn to some examples of how humorous memes can reproduce the idea of an us versus them in relation to gender, sexuality, and race. Many researchers who have looked into online discourse have pointed to the fact that since the early beginning of discussion boards in the 1990s, which later become forums and now has developed into what we refer to as social media, that social interaction between strangers, making connections online, has been constructed as an androcentric space. And that means a space where maleness is assumed and where maleness is centered. So research into more or less extremist versions of this discourse show us that this can be characterized by anti-political correctness, which is expressed through discourses of extreme misogyny, racism, and homophobia in a sort of competition to see who can cause other people the most harm and suffering. And by other people, I mean predominantly women, LGBTQ people, and people of color. The discourse thus escalates in an effort for the users to kind of outdo each other in producing the most extreme content. Racism, homophobia, and misogyny intersect in the discourses produced here. The white male heterosexual centrality online has been prevalent since the beginning of social media, where the notion that, quote, there are no girls on the internet, unquote, was a popular trope. This originates as some sort of early utopian idea of the internet as a place where gender doesn't matter. The idea that the internet is gender neutral, that gender shouldn't matter when everyone is anonymous anyway. However, what researchers find when looking through online communication is that anonymity, in fact, covers for an assumption that everyone is male. Gender doesn't matter until someone reveals that their real identity is that of a non-white, non-heterosexual, and non-male individual. Within this logic, this makes them a legitimate target of trolling and ridicule because they've outed themselves as not part of the collective we, but rather of the collective them. So now I turn to sharing some of the memes I found during my data collection at the height of Me Too. The statistics in terms of the representation of gender, sexuality, and race are quite stark. So women are pictured or mentioned in less than a fifth of the memes, and people of color only feature in 7% of the memes. Now, obviously, part of this result is in the fact that only men and no women are part of my search terms. However, as we see in the example of the Willy Wonka meme that I just showed you, a meme can feature a number of different characters. And Willy Wonka could, for example, have made a joke about, for example, Harvey Weinstein in that meme. What is remarkable is that such a small representation of women and people of color exist in memes that use generic image macros, such as the Willy Wonka meme. So let's have a look at how people of color are represented in the memes I collected. First of all, Asian men are only represented as manga characters, so fictional cartoon characters. There are a couple of examples of African American men who who feature in image macro memes. So image macros that are used again and again with a new text, like the Willy Wonka example. And this is one of these examples. So the meme you'll see on the left side of the screen is an image macro, which is known as "Y'all got any more of them?" It's an image macro depicting Dave Chappelle's character Tyrone Biggums from the sketch comedy TV series Chappelle's Show. Tyrone Biggums is a crack addict, and the image macro includes the phrasal template, "Y'all got any more of them blank," usually illustrating a request or intense craving on the part of the person who uploads the meme. The position of a Black man as a crack user in this meme thus invokes a stereotypical racialized association of crack cocaine with people of color in the United States. The second meme features an image of a man in traditional Middle Eastern attire, presumably placed in some sort of market in a Middle Eastern country. The speech bubbles next to the goats indicate that they have experienced some sort of sexual assault by the hands of the man in the image. The implication here is a reference to the stereotype of the backward savagery of Middle Eastern men, as mentioned by the researcher Ryan Milner that I talked about a few minutes ago. So a stereotype about Middle Eastern men as being so uncivilized that they would resort to sexually assaulting animals. Interestingly, women of color are only represented in 8 memes out of 866 memes, thus making women of color particularly invisible on the 3 social media platforms. So let's have a look at how gender is presented in memes. As I mentioned earlier, there's a male centrality through these memes, but this male centrality, there's a male centrality here. As discussed, one thing is how many men and women are pictured in the memes, but another thing is thinking about how gender seeps through the discourse of the memes and how the sort of narrator of the meme is constructed. An example of this is memes that use the "my reaction when" format, and I found 2 examples of that here. So the MRW that you see in the meme on the left side of the screen is shorthand for "my reaction when," a popular format used to capture memes. Here, the first-person narrator is often portrayed as a man, as seen in the meme to the left, where we have a close-up of Harvey Fierstein's character in Mrs. Doubtfire as he's about to transform Robin Williams' character into Mrs. Doubtfire. The meme uses his facial expression to describe how the narrator of the meme feels, quote unquote, sickened when reading about the accusations against Weinstein. The opposite is the case in the meme to the right, which utilizes the same format, but rather than using the first-person narrator, the format is changed to the third-person narrator, HFW, which stands for "her feeling when." So rather than it being "my feeling when," it's "her feeling when." And that discursively positions women as others, rendering the notion that the narrator of the meme could be a woman impossible. This meme assumes male identity. What this meme exemplifies is how women's experiences and feelings are filtered through a male perspective. They do not have a voice, and rather than being the ones who speak, they are spoken about and spoken for. Men are generally portrayed as an active force in these memes. They have agency and a voice. Women, on the other hand, are generally portrayed as objects without agency. Additionally, women are largely invisible in the memes. And an example of that is the meme here, which pictures 6 famous people who died in 2017. The implication is that Kevin Spacey is as good as dead, since no one in Hollywood will want to have anything to do with him now after the accusations, how they were wrong. But no women are included in the list of famous deaths in 2017, as if they've sort of been written out of history. When women are portrayed in the memes, it is either in the background of a picture or as appendices to a man, either as girlfriends or wives or mothers. Women are thus defined in relation to men. In the meme here, on the left side of the screen, we see Kevin Spacey first expressing disgust with an image of Sports Illustrated swimsuit model Kate Upton wearing a small bikini top. And at the bottom of the meme, he signals approval of an image of a small boy. As such, the meme uses Upton's scantily clad body to underline the absurdity that anyone would not be sexually attracted to her. The meme to the right features the one woman who consistently is portrayed as the enemy throughout these memes, which is Hillary Clinton. The image features her resting her hands on the chest of Harvey Weinstein at what appears to be a red carpet event. The accompanying text suggests that Harvey Weinstein would not be interested in any forms of sexual relations with Clinton, implying that she's so sexually unattractive that not even a rapist would be interested. And this is a general theme in this data set about Me Too. Women exist in these memes to prove a point about the sexuality of the heterosexual men as either sexually unattractive and therefore dismissed and ridiculed for that, or as so sexually attractive that sexual assault is justified, implying that men just cannot help themselves. Either way, women are generally objectified, antagonized, voiceless, and silenced. Moreover, they're often used to reaffirm the heterosexuality of the male users. As we see in the meme to the left, women's bodies can be an instrument to reaffirm the notion that heterosexuality is the norm. So in other words, normative male sexual desire is constructed as always directed towards women. So what happens when the memes discuss Kevin Spacey's homosexuality? This is obviously complicated by the fact that Spacey was accused of sexual assault and harassment by a long line of very young men, including some that were underage at the time of the alleged assaults. Most famously was the actor Anthony Rapp, who accused Spacey of attempting to sexually assault him when Rapp was 14 years old. Spacey responded to Rapp's allegations, which he claims to not remember due to drunkenness, in a tweet where he simultaneously came out as gay. The memes then focus simultaneously on Spacey's coming out as gay, as well as the accusations of him assaulting a young teenager. While this is in part obviously offset by Spacey's own tweet, where he muddles those two things, the memes go a step further, and many of them focus on the themes of homosexuality and child sexual abuse, often drawing connections between the two. So memes about Kevin Spacey portray homosexuality, or I should say male homosexuality, as a hypersexual practice, as always expressed as a sexual act rather than an expression of romance. Male homosexuality is primarily signified through explicit and implicit allusions to anal sex. One meme, for example, muses that teenage actors describe working with Spacey as quote unquote a pain in the ass. Other memes include pictures of large dildos and butt plugs, as well as men dressed in S&M outfits, situating male homosexual sex as fetishized and perverted. For example, in the meme in the next slide here, the meme on the left-hand side of the screen, refers to the reveal at the end of 7, and sorry, spoiler alert, but where David Mills desperately asks, David Mills played by Brad Pitt here, desperately asks Kevin Spacey's character, what's in the box? And Brad Pitt's partner, played by Morgan Freeman, opens the box. And in this meme, so I won't actually spoil it, what's actually in the box, but in this meme, the box is revealed to contain 2 large, dark dildos. So this points to Spacey's sexuality as sort of abnormal and positions homosexual sex as always anal sex. The sex toys are large and dark, almost sort of threatening, and function to construct homosexual sex as the perverted other to normative, non-threatening heterosexual sex. The other meme on the right-hand side of the screen features Bill Clinton and Kevin Spacey, and is accompanied by the text, and then Bill says, "At least my cigar didn't taste like shit." The meme suggests that rather than using the cigar as a sexual prop vaginally, as Monica Lewinsky has detailed that they did, Spacey would logically insert a cigar anally. So homosexual sex is thus constructed as the sort of filthy other to clean heterosexual sex. Humor here functions to draw up an us versus them discourse that constructs homosexuality as other while reaffirming heterosexuality as the norm. So the memes about Spacey often draw a discursive link between homosexuality and child sexual abuse. This meme here features the promotional image for season 1 of House of Cards, in which Spacey, as the main character Frank Underwood, sits in the seat of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. The image highlights Underwood's position as a manipulative evil genius with blood on his hands, which is often celebrated and idealized throughout the memes. An image of a small boy kneeling has been photoshopped into the image, suggesting that the boy is performing oral sex on Spacey. The image text is phrased as a quote by Spacey referencing his coming out tweet, where he responded to Rapp's allegations. Though this quote linguistically separates the 2 words pedophile and gay, the discursive linking of the words in this example and throughout hundreds of other memes, by the way, creates an association rather than a contrast. This discursive link between homosexuality and pedophilia functions as what Sarah Ahmed refers to as a slide of metonymy. So this creates association between words. And when words like gay and pedophile are used repeatedly throughout hundreds of memes, the words tend to stick together as and here I'm quoting Sarah Ahmed, an implicit argument about the causal relations between the 2, unquote. The image in this meme, in combination with both words, creates an association between homosexuality and child sexual abuse, thus perpetuating the notion that the homosexual man is always potentially a pedophile. Now, a more recent trope that has emerged on many meme sharing sites, and this is the last one I'll be sharing with you, is memes that make fun of Vladimir Putin. So after the invasion in Ukraine, this has functioned as a way to sort of signal support for Ukraine and a way to signal disapproval of Russia's invasion. Now, there's obviously nothing new about the idea of ridiculing authoritative leaders of countries as a sign of protest. But what I find particularly interesting in many of the memes I found was the memes that in some way portray Putin as a gay man. So this is the trope of gay Putin. And what we see here on the left-hand side is the meme known as gay unicorn man. The meme in the middle features the face of Putin photoshopped into what seems to be a man dressed in S&M gear holding a candy penis. And finally, we have gay unicorn man again, but this time with Putin's face photoshopped into the image. What these memes have in common is the suggestion that Putin is in fact, is not the suggestion that Putin is in fact gay, but more as if this is the worst possible insult for a person such as Putin. So this obviously refers to the fact that LGBT plus people in Russia face various degrees of discrimination and are famously not allowed to celebrate pride events. But I also think of these memes as examples of what Michael Billig, who I referenced in the beginning of my talk, refers to as rebellious humor with a disciplinary function. Because while the memes do ridicule Putin and therefore mock the authorities and a person in power, I wonder at the same time who we are in fact invited to laugh at. While we're obviously invited to laugh at Putin, we're laughing at him at the expense of gay men. The figure of the gay man here is deeply stereotyped, and the notion that the worst possible insult is to be compared to a gay man discursively situates gay men as the butt of the joke just as much as Putin is. To add a few concluding thoughts, what I think is particularly important to take away from looking at online humor is that while much of this might seem very subtle, the underlying discourses we see here are stark and concerning tendencies of racism, misogyny, and homophobia that seeps through many corners of more or less mainstream social media sites. Though this is presented as humor, something that's supposed to make us laugh and be harmless, my concern is that the humorous discourse creates an us versus them, where we're invited to laugh at marginalized groups. So rather than humor having the power to unify, I'm concerned that what we also see is examples of how humor can be used as an instrument to divide and in subtle ways spread hate online. Thank you. That's everything from me.
Thank you, Maya. I enjoyed your critical analysis of the memes. Yeah, some of the memes are kind of upsetting, but your analysis was really great. Thank you for sharing. And I actually have